Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I am the Executive Director of the Ohio Chapter of the American Planning Association and Chair of APA's New Urbanism Division, and I'm your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, December 6th, and we will hear the presentation Award-Winning Sustainability 2019. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar. For your content questions related to the presentation, again, just type those in the chat box found in your webcast toolbar. We will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. I ask that if your question is for a particular panelist, that you state their name somewhere in your question. Thank you. Coming up on your screen is a list of our sponsoring chapters and divisions for 2019. Thanks to all those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today in particular, the Sustainable Communities Division is our sponsor for today, and we'll hear about them a little bit more as soon as I finish up my housekeeping items here. Upcoming webcast, we have one left, and we're just waiting for a few more pieces of information for you all to register. So be sure to check back on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast, for more information so you can register for that. And hey, we're booking 2020. So again, keep tabs on our website for up-to-date information. Today's webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits. You can log your credits by heading over to planning.org, logging into your My APA account, and then search by today's title or event number. You can find both of those on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And I believe I saw the last slide of the presentation that will be up during the Q&A also has the event number and title on it, in case you didn't get a chance to write it down. We do have some recorded webcasts that are available for distance education, one law, one ethics. For those that need to scrounge up before the end of the year, head over to our webcast webpage so that you can view those on-demand sessions and get your credits. And like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series for up-to-date information on our sessions. And hit the red button, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just head over to YouTube and search Planning Webcast. We'll pop up along with our over 300 recorded sessions. We have over 2,500 subscribers, so please join us. This webcast is being recorded, and will be available on our YouTube channel. And we'll also have a PDF of this presentation available for you to download at the conclusion of today's session on our webcast webpage. Again, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenny. Is it Jenny Koch?
Yes, it's Jenny Koch.
And if she spells her name Koch, so I think I'm pretty good for remembering that the rules do not apply to your last name.
You know, I will answer to anything, but thank you. Yeah.
Well, I just turned the controls over to you, Jenny, to kick us off.
Great. Thanks, Christine. So yeah, I'm Jenny Koch, and I'm a senior associate and planner with Roadside and Harwell, or RHI, as we are now known. But today I'm representing the Sustainable Communities Division, which is one of the hosts for today's webinar, which is centered on projects that have been awarded the division's Award for Excellence in Sustainability. But before we get into that, I just wanted to go ahead and acknowledge our sponsors. So thanks to all these organizations who have helped us put on events such as this webinar. Our sponsors for this fiscal year include VHB, the Urban Collective, Urban Eco Plan, Urban Works, the University of Utah Department of City and Metropolitan Planning, the University of Florida Online Masters of Urban and Regional Planning, TESCA, Smith Group, Robinson & Cole, Mara ZOR, Ideation Planning, Niche Engineering, HAF, FAR Associates, East End Land Planning, Dewberry, Devon's Enterprise Commission, and Clarion. And that group grows almost every week, it seems. It's a long list, and I promise I don't have it memorized. But thanks again to our sponsors and to all of our division members and to groups like the Planning Webcast Series, who are great resources. If you're interested in volunteering with Sustainable Communities Division, or you want to share ideas for other webinars or activities, here's our contact info, and you can find more information about how to get involved on our website. We'll also have this information up along with the speaker contact info during the Q&A at the end of the session. Before I introduce the other speakers for today, I wanted to go ahead and provide a little context about our awards program. The Sustainable Communities Division Awards program is in our 7th year, and we do have our nomination session open right now through January 18th, 2020, so there's still plenty of time to submit. There's a couple links there where you can find our information packet, which has all of the information you would need in it. But I would refer you to that for more information, as I'm just giving a really brief overview today. As with last year, nominations are submitted via a web form. It's a SurveyMonkey form, so something a lot of us have used before. You do need to complete the form in one go. You can't save and come back to it. So on the website, we have provided a Word template for you to sort of fill in with your responses before you go into the form. New for 2020, we do have a few revised categories and a clarified scoring structure. I will show the categories shortly here, and I don't include information about the scoring structure in today's webinar, but what we did is just in the information packet, you'll find more detailed information about how the jury will be analyzing each of the submissions. So that might be helpful for you to look at before you submit. In terms of the award categories, this year we have 9 of them. We added an energy category because we think there's a lot of great, interesting things going on. We want to encourage those submissions. And we also revised the community plan and municipal, state, or regional plan categories to describe further different differentiations in the size of the community and projects that we're looking for there to sort of spread out these submissions a bit. So we have not put any FAQs up on the website yet, but if we get any, or if we have any to add, we will put them at this link. But if you want to get an email with any substantial updates, again, there have not been any yet, but if we have any, you can send an email to me. My email is listed here. It will also be on the last slide today, and I will keep you up to date. So that's it for the overview of the awards. If you want, you can feel free to ask me any questions at the end of the session as well. I'll be here for that. But I want to, before we jump into our speakers, I'll give you a brief introduction to each of them. We're happy to have 3 of last year's award-winning teams represented today to talk about their projects. So starting from our third speaker, will discuss Building a Better Norfolk, a zoning ordinance for the 21st century, which was the winning submission in our Sustainable Policy Law or Tool category last year. Jeremy Sharp will be talking about that project. Jeremy is the zoning administrator for the City of Norfolk's Department of City Planning. He's assisted in the development and implementation of multiple neighborhood plans, plan amendments, and ordinance revisions. He is the project manager for the zoning ordinance update, which is a complete rewrite of the city's zoning code. He was also the project manager for Vision 2100, a very long-range, resiliency-focused vision for the city. And he was the co-project manager for Plan Norfolk 2030, which was the 2013 update of Norfolk's comprehensive plan. Our second speaker today will discuss the Los Angeles County Master Plan for Sustainable Parks and Recreation, Phase 1, which was a winner in our Sustainable Parks, Recreation, or Open Space Planner Projects category. Our speaker for that, our winner will be Clement Lau. Clement is a departmental facilities planner at the County of Los Angeles Department of Parks and Recreation. Clement has 20 years of professional experience in urban and regional planning, and currently works on a variety of park planning projects. He enjoys writing about a wide range of planning issues and on the author panel for urban design. He has also published articles in the APA's Planning Magazine, the National Recreation and Parks Association Parks and Recreation Magazine, and Parks and Rec Business Magazine. And our third speaker, who will be first up right when I finish up here, will be Joel Mills. He'll be discussing the Sustainable Design Assessment Team program. Joel is Senior Director of the AIA's Center for Communities by Design. His 24-year career has been focused on strengthening civic capacity and civic institutions around the world. This work has helped millions of people participate in democratic processes, visioning efforts, and community planning initiatives across 4 continents. In the U.S., Joel has worked with over 100 communities, leading participatory processes that facilitated community-generated strategies for success. So that's all that I have. I'll be shortly passing it off to Joel, but I do want to encourage you to send questions throughout the presentation, and we'll be happy to speak with you later. Thanks.
Thanks, Jenny. So I'm Joel Mills, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the AIA's Sustainable Design Assessment Team program. The AIA is just like the APA in that we are the professional membership association for architects in the United States. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C., so I do want to bring you greetings if I can. There we go. Bring you greetings from Washington, D.C. I took this photograph this morning, which I think is a good illustration of what's going on in our communities today. It's a group of GW students, George Washington University, participating in a climate protest that was designed to bring gridlock to the downtown streets. You know, it's a good illustration of how people in our communities are frustrated today, and when they don't feel like they have a voice in important issues that are going on, often act in more conflictual ways and sometimes to their detriment. This is a good illustration because the protest is a real success at causing gridlock, but of course, think about the emissions that are being contributed through the protest as people sit in their cars this morning, and there was quite a backup. So the Sustainable Design Assessment Team, or SDAT program, was started in 2005. It's a public service program of the American Institute of Architects. The mechanics of it are that communities apply for assistance every year. When we accept an application, we find a volunteer to serve as our team leader. We go and visit the community for an initial scoping visit, begin to understand what the key issues are, and then we build an interdisciplinary team that goes back and has an intensive public process with that community. This image is from last year in Hillsburg, California. A community of about 11,000, over 800 people turned out for the initial public workshop. This is a photograph from the introduction of it. So you can see the backs of all of our team members, which include a preservationist, a urban designer, a development finance expert, another designer, an arts expert, an affordable housing specialist, and Wayne Fiden, FAICP, our planner, who looked at a lot of the land use and connectivity issues. So every team we bring together is interdisciplinary. And just a note on format here, we were introducing the workshop. We were in a gymnasium in this case because we knew we were going to have a somewhat big crowd. And what we did once we got into the workshop was we had 7 different stations around the room. A couple of them bilingual to deal with Spanish language residents in that particular community, all asking sort of different pieces of questions so everyone here could contribute to the process. One of the things that we like to say about what makes our process different is we're not another consultant team. Every single team that works with us, the team members come from outside that community and region. They're not paid a cent for their service. And they're not allowed to develop any business as a result of their service. They also don't have a client. We're not hired by city planning departments or other agencies. We're not there to serve the public sector or the development community or any other one sector. We're there to observe what the conditions are on the ground, listen to what the community aspirations are, and then build strategies for their success. So the product at the end is also a little different in that we're not producing a planning document per se. Our final product over a 3-day period is a community presentation and then a report that follows, and that report outlines priority actions to take and strategies to take on those key issues. So it's not a comprehensive look at the community, but it is an integrated look across issues, and it is about priority, identifying priority actions to take to build momentum for change. This program is based in a lot of the concepts from an older program with another bad acronym, RUDAT. It's the Regional and Urban Design Assistance Team program that AIA has had since 1967. It's a well-established process and philosophy, methodology that's been well regarded over the years, and has led to a lot of success stories in the U.S. from the Pearl District in Portland to Santa Fe's rail yard revitalization to other things. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the context within which we work, just to emphasize how this process then has value to communities. Here are three sort of data points that get at what we see happening in U.S. communities today. From APA, 2012 survey found that more than 50% of people want to be personally involved in planning efforts. And then from Bloomberg, a piece of data that's capturing that a lot of city leaders, aren't reaching that level of engagement in terms of how they involve citizens, which is, when we're having a lot of processes, as is reported through National League of Cities, often a lot of them are not meeting public expectations, and that's leading to a lot of issues in communities. From the professional side, we kind of see two different things happening when we look at the quality of processes. There are a lot of, on the left here, there are a lot of processes that are really public relations engagements. You may have had a public meeting, but there was an idea behind what an agency or sponsor wanted to do going into it. And what you're really looking for is, buy-in. When I hear buy-in, all the red flags are raised for me, versus a process that is not going in with ideas about solutions per se, but is a values-based process that builds understanding through the process, so that when you get to the decisions, there's never consensus, right? But there's a lot of understanding about how those decisions were made, so a lot less conflict. One more data point from the ICMA a few years ago that looks at the quality of dialogue happening in communities, and you can see from this almost 40% of local government leaders are reporting that the dialogue is either somewhat polarized or very polarized, and what's happening is, as people are engaged in processes that don't meet their expectations, they're disappointed. Your average citizen is dropping out of the participation, and who's left, of course, is the extremes in any community, right? So you've got people that are trying to push agendas that are often in conflict with one another, and it leads to something looking like this. I'm cheating on this particular headline because I like its absurdity. It's from The Onion, so it's not real news. This is the original fake news, if you will, but it gets to, what happens in a lot of communities, and how that dialogue just degrades over time. And if you want any illustrations on this, a simple Google search will get you to a world of pain in terms of the press about processes that are not leading where we want them to go. We have a whole language about this in the U.S. We created our own acronym, NIMBYs, to try to describe the lack of public support and a lot of the conflict that's happening. But this is often the result of processes that didn't build understanding, that we're trying to teach people instead of involve people and reflect their values in the end. And as a result, a lot of that stuff isn't getting done. According to this piece, over $1 trillion in potential development. And there's a real sort of cycle that's happening in communities where, as people drop out of public processes, you get more extreme voices dominating them, so you don't have a true community dialogue. It leads to more and more politicization, more conflict, distrust, government fear of public participation, so less interest in pursuing it because it's so painful for them, less participatory processes, more anger, et cetera, et cetera. And the health of your quality of your dialogue and democratic processes really suffers as a result. So the big lesson learned is, communities with trust issues, which is almost every community, it's just a matter of, where we are in the spectrum of that, require more intensive engagement efforts, higher levels of involvement, so that people have respect for what decisions are being made. And if you drive around any especially struggling neighborhood in the country, you'll see visible signs everywhere of this kind of frustration that are indicators about the need to have more robust approaches. So when we work in communities today, there are two things that we always hear on sort of the first visit or early in the process. One of which is, we have a unique community here. What works in other places won't necessarily work here. I know you're bringing a bunch of outsiders, but you need to understand our community. And that is always a valid point. That's why we have public processes. The nice thing about bringing legitimate outsiders to the community is that oftentimes they've never visited this community before, so they need to understand its values. So the conversation is not about problem solving as much as it is about the identity of that community, what their aspirations and visions are, and it leads you to much more understanding, much more civic pride through a process when you begin that way. The other thing we always hear is, we don't need another plan. I'm sure this is familiar to almost everybody on this line. We don't need another plan. We have plenty of them. They're all shelf plans, right? We need implementation strategies, and that's what this process is all about. Specifically, it's all about building momentum. We have one community from our older program, our RUDAT, that at the 20-year anniversary of their process, their original process, after a lot of success and transformation, they wrote an op-ed and called it the snowball effect. And that is a good metaphor for what we're trying to do with every project. Instead of, most communities the metaphor would be sort of trying to push the boulder up the mountain where, there's a lot of change you need, a lot of investment. And so, foul on my part, excuse me. So they're trying to build these giant investment strategies that are capital intensive, that take, 10 years to get through. And as a result, often 5 years into that process, the bottom falls out. So at the end of one of our processes, there are items that you can do with volunteers the day we leave town, right? And build out towards a vision that does have a lot of investment in it, but it's starting with the things that are most feasible and building momentum. That's what it's all about. Some brief examples of context and scope and how varied that can be. I often get questions about, well, we have, a particular situation in our community, would it fit? And so here are just a few examples. Austin, Texas, we were there to work on a waterfront district there. In 2012, there was a lot of conflict about development, particularly neighborhoods, what we would call NIMBYs, fighting any development for that area because of a lack of trust. And after a 3-day process, we had popular support actually pushing the ideas that came out of that dialogue. It led to an EPA grant that did further work, a University of Texas studio, and then some hired consultants to finish off a plan, which won an APA Sustainability Award just a couple years ago. In Indianapolis, that's where these photographs are for this slide. We were looking at an inner city area a couple miles north of the downtown that had 6 brownfields, a lot of abandoned housing, all the issues of a struggling neighborhood. And they were having trouble even engaging the community to start in the beginning. And we had a special meeting a couple weeks before the project, and it took 5 minutes to explain the process and get people opposing it to actively participating. So we had hundreds of people involved, led to some of the initial sustainable community grants from the feds to clean up a lot of the brownfields and do some housing work. Louisville, Kentucky, we worked in an area called West of 9th, which is an area where you cross what they call the wall, one street that has a lot of design barriers, and then your incomes and all your other data of a healthy community drop by 2/3 right off the bat. St. Helens, Oregon was an industrial waterfront in a small community. Dubuque, Iowa was climate change and flooding related that led to a partnership with Fed and state money to take on some of the Mississippi River issues and other related flooding issues. Portland, Maine was a refugee community. It's a site, neighborhood that is a gateway site for refugees from around the world, where we had a family dinner and kids actually translated for parents who were from a host of different countries, so you couldn't have translation, but the kids could translate for the family. So it was the first time that community even had a dialogue. Sapality Village was a Hopi community in Arizona. where they didn't even have it. One of the things we did for them was translate oral tradition with geocoding to create their first map. I mentioned Hillsburg, that was around affordable housing issues. Jeffersonville, Indiana was a project on corridors, a specific corridor there that was schizophrenic. Burlington, North Carolina looked at a major former industrial site that had been a jobs creator and how it had been vacant for 3 decades, looked at how it could be adapted and reused. And Lubbock, Texas looked at downtown revitalization. So host of different issues in different contexts. I want to jump into just 2 communities to illustrate what happens over time. The first is Port Angeles, Washington. It's sort of at the tip of the state, so it's the gateway community from Canada. It was a former timber town, and when those plants closed down, downtown suffered. The downtown looked drab. You've got people going to nearby Olympic National Park. They're just driving through town, not stopping. So, we had a big public process here, a few images from it, but they had a meeting afterward and built a matrix with all the team's recommendations and then prioritized 10 to start with right away, which are reflected here, and began working, with volunteers. So this middle image on this slide, within 3 months of the process, with volunteers and donated paint and materials, they repainted 43 buildings in their downtown. So instant visual impact boom that led to a facade improvement program, and then signage and wayfinding. And then they began working on streetscape, making upgrades to that. And then it led to a big investment on their waterfront, developing in 2 phases, a waterfront that has now won design awards, that's celebrated in the community, that helps connect the downtown, and that's bringing people to stay in the community. So tourism has increased by 59%. This is an image from Outside Magazine. It's not a qualitative competition for this best places. It's really a popularity contest. They're a community of just, now they're up to, I think, over 20,000. There were 17 at the time we worked with them. And they came in second to Chattanooga by a few votes, which is just a reflection of how pride has changed there and how much people love and are captured in the momentum. You can see from this slide, 48 new commercial occupancies per year. They don't have the vacancy issue they used to have in downtown. I was there last year for a quick visit, and they've got a new arts center, a cultural center that's interpreting the local indigenous people's importance to the waterfront and the rest of the area. I met someone who now owns a coffee shop that was inspired by the dialogue during the process to open, and people feel really good about their downtown. And this is a quote that I lifted from the city manager's letter for this award from APA endorsing the program. And he talks a lot about the civic pride being the big thing that came out of it, the work together, can-do attitude that came out of that process being so much more important than even the technical assistance. And Nathan West has also been a volunteer for us now in a couple other communities, bringing the story of Port Angeles and some of the things they've accomplished to new places. The other example I want to share is a really recent one, just a couple of years old, Helper, Utah, a small community of just 2,000 residents, isolated because it's not close to Salt Lake. It is on the way to some of those big national parks, but it's right off the highway, but it's not close to anything else. And this image kind of captures their ethos there. They are a hardworking community, traditional mining community. They had 33 mines, and they're down to 3 today. And so they have higher unemployment, but they're named after the engines that got the trains over the mountains there. And so there's just an ethos about working together. This slide is an actual slide from the community process. What came out of doing some post-it exercises about what you can do personally, and they really took off with these ideas. They were their ideas. Over 10% of the population participated in the process, but now almost everybody in town has physically contributed to the town's transformation. You can see images here, everything from downtown to riverfront restoration to pop-up shops. And so here's sort of the 9 things they prioritized right off the bat. They took on redoing a park on the riverfront. This is all donated materials. They started a pop-up program, which led to permanent shops. They don't have vacancy in their downtown anymore. They got state and federal monies to do river restoration work. They've engaged in Main Street improvements with volunteers, signage and wayfinding efforts, and a lot of downtown activation. And I won't read the quote from the mayor, but they are now seen as the model for small town Utah. The governor goes around mentioning helper as their model, and as a result, we did 2 additional projects in Utah this year. I think we're going to do at least 1 next year as well, because people see a success story and they want to get in on some of that magic. I'm not going to take questions right now because we're going to come back to that at the end, but did want to note we have a YouTube channel with a lot of films about other communities we've worked in. So I am going to pass things off now to Clement, who's going to talk about the good news from LA County.
All right, thank you, Joe. So I'm happy and excited to be talking about the Los Angeles County Master Plan for Sustainable Parks and Recreation Phase 1. I'm Clement Lau with the Department of Parks and Recreation in Los Angeles County. And this is a plan that is not sitting on a shelf. It is actually being implemented. I'm sorry, there's a little delay on my slides showing up.
You might want to try right-clicking and hitting next.
Yeah.
Sometimes that first slide gets stuck.
Okay. Yeah, that's. I am right-clicking. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. So phase 1 of the master plan consists of community parks and recreation plans for 6 of the most park-poor unincorporated communities in LA County. They include East Los Angeles, East Rancho Dominguez, Lenox, Walnut Park, West Athens, Westmont, and Willowbrook. And I'm really glad to be talking about this because I was involved from the very beginning, from when we worked on a grant application to actually managing the project and working closely with our team at the Department of Parks and Recreation to community members, the county departments, as well as the consulting firm of PlaceWorks, and to now where we're implementing the plan. And now I'll talk about that in a little bit. So these 6 communities collectively are home to about 257,000 residents, which is a quarter of the population in the unincorporated areas of the county. And we're calling this phase 1 because we anticipate preparing similar plans for other unincorporated communities in the future. There have been a few articles written about this project, which I'll refer to as the community parks and recreation plans. So one is called Nurturing Neighborhoods. I actually wrote that one, and it was published in APA's Planning magazine. And the other one is in the Strategic Growth Council's report. They feature our project. And both of these focus on the sustainability and benefits that are offered by parks, as well as the park plans. And so they talk about the environmental, social, and economic benefits, as well as this, sustainability, how it advances sustainability in general. And this what the plans look like. And it's really exciting for us as a department. It's almost our first effort into data-driven park planning, where we looked at a lot of data metrics, mapping using GIS. And it really, we think, elevates park planning. When most people think of parks, they only think of fun and games, but really we think it's more than just fun and games, but it's also about advancing sustainability as well as health and wellness. And throughout the rest of my slides, I'll show you some highlights from the plans on how we do that, as well as provide an update on how we are actually implementing these plans. So one key aspect of the plans is spatial analysis using GIS and the idea of intersectionality, where we looked at different layers of information. So in this case, it's the community of East Los Angeles, and some of the layers of data that we looked at include population density, existing land use, crime data, transportation, safety, connectivity, air quality, the distance from freeways, as well as identifying vacant land. Also, we looked at tree canopy and urban forestry. So unlike traditional parks and recreation plans, we actually went beyond park boundaries. So we not only looked at the trees within our parks, we also looked at tree canopy throughout the community using LiDAR or aerial imagery data. And so here, some of the information that we gathered in terms of the types and species of trees, as well as the environmental benefits generated by the trees in each of the parks in East Los Angeles. So it was really important for us to be able to quantify these information to show the public as well as our decision makers. A key part of our project was community engagement and outreach. These are communities that suffer a bit from planning and meeting fatigue, so we really try to be creative in how we engage communities. So we use more of a mixed methods approach, which included both traditional meetings as well as tours, bike tours, walking tours, activities that focus on youth and kids. And you see in these photos examples of the dot sticker exercise, how we involve kids in designing their ideal park. And that was really important for us, involving children and teenagers who are current as well as future users of the parks that we have and the parks that we will create. It was also important for us to involve our partners in the community. So in these photos, you also see representatives from our Department of Regional Planning as well as the Sheriff's Department. And speaking of other departments, so our county has this Healthy Design Work Group, which really served as a technical advisory committee for our project. And they included members from the Department of Planning, Public Health, Public Works, the Arts Commission, as well as the Community Development Commission. And it really helped us to have this group together to collaborate, coordinate, and share information. Like I said earlier about planning and meeting fatigue, one way we try to address that is to plan events together where we have one event and invite the community to participate in that one event instead of multiple meetings, leading to fatigue as well as confusion for community members. So after we do all the analysis and all the gather all the inputs from community members, we developed what we call green visions, basically identifying the potential opportunities for new parks, urban greening, planting new trees, connecting to outside greenways, just a really big picture of what could be done to improve the sustainability and green a community. And again, in this case, the example is from East Los Angeles. So with the potential projects in mind, we did some calculation again and quantify what the potential benefits and impacts would be. So the charts to the left show what would happen if we implemented the high priority park projects and increase, in this case, 19 acres of parkland. What would be that increase in surface would be the number of people served, as the number of youth served. We also calculated the potential benefits of a park project in terms of water savings, the carbon sequestration when we increase canopy coverage in different areas, and we documented the environmental benefits of existing parks in terms of stormwater intercepted, air pollutants reduced, and carbon sequestered. Now, it was important for us, for ourselves, and for the community to see what our proposed parks could look like. So what I'm showing here are some of the renderings that were done. The one to the top left here is actually a project that we will be implementing soon. That site's been acquired by the county. We have refined the concept plans and design with the community, and we're just hoping for some state grant funding to implement the project. The one on the bottom is a proposed park in a utility corridor, which would provide over 8 acres of passive open space for a community. And the one on the top right here is a proposed park on a railroad corridor. More drawings here of a staircase for exercise, skate park, and then a bike skills park, and then to the right is an outdoor learning exercise area at a local library. And I'll talk more about that as an example of how we're implementing the plan. You see to the left here, this is actually a page from our West Athens Westmont Community Parks and Recreation Plan. And we show what's existing and the rendering of what is proposed. And I'm happy to report we actually had the grand opening a couple of weeks ago of this, what we call Woodcrest Play Park, which includes this outdoor play area and reading area, as you can see from the photos. So building on the work we did on the master plan or the community parks and recreation plans, we actually built on the analytical framework, all the data and mapping and analysis, and did a county-wide effort called the Parks and Recreation Needs Assessment, which was completed in 2016. And this covered not just unincorporated areas, but all cities of Los Angeles County. So it was a huge undertaking that was never done before, and it was very much data-driven, and it identified communities of very high and high park need, which really helps us to focus our attention and resources to those communities most in need of parks. And you see the mapping and the data here is very similar to what I showed you for the community parks and recreation plans, because it's really built on that foundation of data analysis. And also something else we're working on currently is called the 10-Minute Walk campaign, which is a national campaign to increase park access, or increase the number and percentage of residents within a 10-minute walk of a park. So we're building on the work that we did on the community park and recreation plan for West Athens, Westmont, which are the maps shown to the right. We're focusing in the really dark red, purple area and figuring how to increase park access there, where we can encourage more residents to walk to a park. And so some of the work that we've been doing is a community walk in which we engage community members and other county departments to walk from the site of the Woodcrest Play Park I showed earlier to a future park that we're hoping to implement starting next year. And then to the left here, I just want to show that we're taking on really an intersectional approach to park planning. So we have our community parks and recreation plan, but there are also other plans that influence and impact this area, such as the pedestrian plan, transit-oriented district specific plan, the general plan, and sustainability plan, as well as Vision Zero. So we're trying to tie issues, various quality of life issues, together, from parks to pedestrian safety, to sustainability and land use, just thinking, having big picture thinking, and building on the work that we did on the community parks and recreation plan to just improve the quality of life for the 6 communities, and in this case, West Athens, Westmont. And that's it.
All right, well, hello, everybody. Thank you, Clement. My name is Jeremy Sharp. I am the zoning administrator for the city of Norfolk, and let me get this going. And welcome to Norfolk. So again, Jeremy Sharp, city of Norfolk. I have been the zoning administrator here for about a year, but before that, I was responsible for rewriting our zoning ordinance. And I love to say that this was one of our public meetings for our zoning ordinance. Love to say we got this many people at one of our meetings. I believe this is a wine festival, so can't be that lucky. So for those of you who don't know Norfolk, this is us. We are the 2nd largest city in Virginia. We are the center of the Hampton Roads Tidewater region, which is a region of about 1.5 million people, and we have about 250,000 of that. We are tied to our water. Our water is our lifeblood. We have the world's largest naval station, Naval Station Norfolk, and the Port of Virginia here, which is the 3rd busiest on the East Coast. Water is our lifeblood, but water is also our biggest challenge, and I'll get into that going forward. So how did we get here? How did we get to a new zoning ordinance? In about 2008, our city council decided that our previous comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance had lived a long enough life. They had both been adopted in 1992, and it was time to create new ones. So we set out the process first, as I think most should, of drafting a comprehensive plan. So we started that in 2008 and completed it in 2013. Adopted it in early 2013, and then a few months later, everything changed for the city of Norfolk because we joined the 100 Resilient Cities, and we changed our mindset finally as to how we were going to approach our challenges, particularly with how we would deal with water and flooding going forward. So the result of that process was, first, our drafting of our zoning ordinance required quite a bit of a different direction. First, the city went about adopting a resilience strategy. That was done in 2005. We actually started work on our comprehensive zoning ordinance rewrite just before then, and it definitely influenced the process. And then we really influenced the process with a sea level rise action plan, what we call Vision 2100, which was a amazing process, an amazing document that really does look 85 years in the future at that time to see what the city was going to look like with anywhere from 3 to 10 feet of sea level rise. So that obviously was going to have a big impact on our zoning, and we really then picked up from there to try and get a new zoning ordinance on the books. So to just take that step back to give everybody the grounding on what our zoning ordinance is about. Our zoning ordinance is about resilience, so have to talk about our resilience strategy and our resilience challenges. So for Norfolk, it's a three-legged stool. We have coastal resilience, which is mostly what we're going to talk about, flooding, sea level rise. We deal with economic resilience. Again, the Navy and the port are dominant industries, and not enough other industries are dominant here. So we definitely have a challenge there. Not much that zoning can do about that, but it's something that the city is considering. And then we have social and neighborhood resilience. We have severe concentrations of poverty, and we have disconnected communities in our city. There are elements that the zoning ordinance can address those, but again, I'm not necessarily going to talk too much about that today. What I'm going to talk about more than anything is how the ordinance addresses things like flooding, climate change, sea level rise, things like that. So Norfolk has a long history of dealing with flooding. These are just some historic photos of floods in our city. Particularly the ones in 33 and 38 were, particularly the 33 flood was legendary around here because that's our downtown, which does not normally flood. And so these were benchmarks for a long time, but it's only getting more common. These are regular floods that happen, and keep in mind these aren't hurricanes. These may be hurricanes, they may be nor'easters. Actually, nor'easters tend to give us more of these, and they're sometimes just high tides or heavy rain events in a summer thunderstorm. So bottom line, these are happening more often, they're happening more widespread, they're happening in areas of the city that we haven't seen flooding ever happen before. These are not necessarily our flood zones or our floodplains. These are just areas that are now experiencing flooding as our climate changes and our world changes. And we think it's only going to get worse. So what you see here is the outline of our city. On the left, you see what our sea levels would look like if we had 2 to 3 feet of water rise. And that's about 5% of the city that's currently land that would be underwater at least part of every day at every high tide cycle. That's a lot, but it's workable. We can work around that. Most of these areas are currently in flood-prone areas, and we don't really encourage development in there anyway. On the right, though, you see what the flood zones would look like. So these are the areas that we really do have to concern ourselves with. These are the areas that would, with any significant event, would expect to see flooding, and that's about 47% of the city of Norfolk right there, including some of our most high-value neighborhoods downtown. Most of our major industrial and institutional areas are all included in that orange area on the right. So that's a real big issue that we have to figure out. So how can zoning respond to those challenges? Those challenges are typically going to be approached through heavy infrastructure, flood walls, flood gates, and we're looking into all of those elements. But how can zoning respond? How can zoning really impact that? And that was the question that we had to answer with our new ordinance. So like I said, we started around 2014. We paused a little bit for getting the resilience strategy and the Vision 2100 document finished, and then we really kicked into gear after 2016 to try and wrap up towards our adoption date, which was early 2018. So it was a 3.5-year process. We reached several thousand residents, but any of those listening who is a planner knows that zoning ordinance meetings don't necessarily bring out the crowds. we really did a lot of effort to get as much input as we could, and it tended to be very, very focused input on what does this mean to your property. But we got a lot of input, and specifically, we worked very heavily with our local builders association, and that was a key element to getting this thing done at the end. So to answer the question, how does zoning impact flooding and help us with our flood resilience? We already had the answer somewhat before we started. In 2013, we raised our freeboard requirements. So if you're in a high-risk flood zone, you're required to build 3 feet above the predicted base flood elevation. And that we were the first in Virginia to do that, and several other communities followed us behind in that respect. So that was something that was already done before our new ordinance. What we followed on with was in our new zoning ordinance, and I'll talk about this in a minute. We require, wherever you are in the city, not just in the high-risk flood zone, we require a new structure, single family in particular, to be 16 to 24 inches above the grade to try and address just those flooding challenges. But beyond freeboard, so we had that answer, but what do we do for other things? So again, you see the 3 legs of our resilience stool. So I'll come back to the coastal resilience. For economic resilience, we talked about flexible zoning. We talked about hierarchical use districts. There's a lot of different things that we can do with that. In our neighborhood resilience, we did a lot with form standards, context-sensitive development. We are 97% developed in the city of Norfolk, and we are landlocked. We're completely locked in by adjacent cities, so we're not growing anywhere. We're replacing homes. So it was a big interest on our part to make sure that whatever new development happens, which is about 30 new homes a month, even in a built-out city, whatever development happens does mimic the surrounding neighborhoods as much as possible. And then there's the coastal resilience element. So I'll come back to, I'll talk about that now. So here's another way of looking at it. We have resilience features in our zoning ordinance that are either base standards, and then we have what we'll call resilience overlays. So for our base standards, again, we require of all new development, they have to meet our resilience quotient, which I'll talk about in a second. They have to meet our form standards, which I just spoke about. And then we have quite a bit of flexibility in our zoning districts to address resilience. So for the resilience quotient, the simplest way to understand it is for every new single-family home in the city, you're required to do 3 things. You're required to be elevated at least 16 inches off the grade, and that's just the adjacent grade. It's not tied to any flood zone. It's just simply at the grade of the house when you build it. The first floor elevation has to be 16 inches up. We require 200 gallons of water capture. Typically that's done through rain barrels, although that's not what we recommend. We prefer other solutions. We want to capture that water on site so it doesn't run into our stormwater system. And then we require a generator hookup. So doesn't require a generator, doesn't require anything more than just a simple generator pigtail that can be used for electric or solar, as well as hooking up a generator. We require all of those elements for a single family house. Now, the image you see here is not a single-family house. It's just under 100-unit townhouse development with some mixed use in it. The resilience quotient gets a whole lot more complicated for them. It requires either capturing the first 1.25 inches of their stormwater, which above and beyond the state stormwater requirements is a big deal. It's quite substantial infrastructure. It does get done, but we tried to create a simpler option, which was a point system. So there are 3 essential point values that you have to meet. There is a stormwater management element, there is a risk reduction element, and an energy resilience element. And so see, if you tie it back to the single family home, you have the rain barrels of stormwater management, the generator hookup is energy efficiency, and the elevating the house is risk reduction. And you see that here with these 3 elements. So this project, just under 100 townhomes, they met the point requirement. They're required to get a certain number of points for their development if they choose this option, and they chose to do these things, constructing to a higher wind quality rating, and to elevate the first floor. They're building townhouse units, so that's a fairly easy thing to do. To treat additional stormwater runoff, and they really chose to do a lot more treatment in their case, and something as simple as a fenced community space. And then each unit with a generator hooked up, again, sort of mimicking the single family model. Something as simple as operable windows, so that if the power does go out, you can get breeze through the home. And then they're actually reusing a portion of a retail building, and then tankless water units and water heaters in certain units. Now, this is a very simple markup of how this can be done. This is all done through a set of tables that the applicant can choose from, and it includes things all the way up to a green roof, cool roof, green walls, full generators. Any number of options are in there, and they're assigned a point value, and the developer gets to choose from those options. So this is something that we are definitely building on right now and trying to figure out how it works. We know we didn't get it right on day one, so if you look up our ordinance and you see these tables, you may think that these numbers don't always make sense, and we agree. But we set a mark on the wall, and we said that we're going to try and figure out how to make this work, and how to really create resilience in our city through all of the new development that we're seeing. So then there's the other element, is the overlay districts. So if you're familiar with zoning, you're familiar with overlay zoning districts. So essentially, if you're not, you have the base zoning district. Could be a residential or commercial zoning district, and on top of that you have an overlay that requires different elements or different standards. So in our case, we have 3 overlay districts that we created in this ordinance. 3 resilience overlay districts. So we have a coastal resilience overlay, a neighborhood resilience overlay, and upland resilience overlay. I'm not going to talk about the neighborhood resilience overlay. That's really just a repackaging of any overlay that you would do for a neighborhood that might talk about the form or design of a structure. But the coastal and the upland are, I think, fairly relevant to this discussion. So the coastal resilience overlay, and here again is the map of our projected flood zones with a certain amount of sea level rise. The coastal resilience overlay applies to all of our high-risk flood zones at this time. So if you're developing in one of those high-risk flood zones, so an AE flood zone, for example, you have to go even higher on your first floor elevation. You have to have additional open space and landscaping. And landscaping has to be salt tolerant because we're dealing with a coastal environment. It does, if you're using that point system, you have to get additional points for your off of your development. And it does put limits on parking. It actually does cap the amount of parking. It puts a stricter parking maximum than we would apply anywhere else in the city. It also requires pervious pavement for that parking, but that's something that we're actually trying to figure out whether that really makes sense, because a lot of those areas are areas that when they do see flooding, we don't necessarily want to have pervious pavers, because that's going to bring sediments in and clog up the pervious elements. So we're still figuring that one out, but that is currently an element of the ordinance. And then we have the upland resilience overlay, which is everything else, the upland areas of our city. This does one thing and one thing only, and it hasn't been used yet, but the idea is essentially, if you're familiar with a transfer of development rights program, it kind of functions a similar fashion, but it's not a TDR program. The idea is essentially that if you have a low-lying area and you're developing on a high ground area, if you're developing on a high ground area, you can put an easement, a conservation easement, on a low ground area, and that easement will count towards a substantial number of points in your resilience quotient for your new development on the high ground. Hasn't been used yet. We're actually working with a local conservation organization, a land trust, to make this work. But we're really excited about that as a possibility to really transfer some of the value from one place to the other, and trying to encourage people to develop on the high ground rather than the low. And that is all I have, so I'll pass it back.
Wonderful. Thank you. So again, folks, if you have questions, feel free to type them in that chat box. And again, just please list who you would like to answer the question. That will help me immensely. So the first question, this one is going to be for Jenny regarding submissions for the awards. The question is, does the submitter need to be a member of the Sustainable Communities Division in order to apply for the award?
That's an easy one. They do not need to be a member of the Sustainable Communities Division.
Okay, thank you. All right, next question is for Clement. What sources or tools did you use to quantify the GHG emissions reduction air quality benefits from the trees?
So I think we use a tool called iTrees. And my understanding, I'm not a specialist on that, but our consultants help us with that. So I think we enter in the number, the tree, the species, and type of trees, and it calculates the various environmental benefits, including the GHG.
Okay, thank you. Next couple questions are for Jeremy. So first one, how does tree preservation play a role in your resilience plan?
So we, let me see. There are points available in the resilience quotient for maintaining trees. That's a big element, and we're actually, as we learn about how this works, we're putting more emphasis on that. So we're actually probably going to put a pretty high point value on preserving large trees. We actually, in our ordinance, in our landscape ordinance, we do value substantially. We use a point system for that as well. So if you do maintain an existing specimen tree, you basically don't have to do any other landscaping on your site.
Okay, thank you. Next one, Jeremy, again, how did you deal with the climate change naysayers in the Vision 2100 plan?
Sure.
There must have been some significant opposition to such a forward-looking.
So we are fortunate in that we are an urban place, so we don't have a lot of that. Everybody pretty much recognizes in Norfolk that flooding is happening and moving forward. So that's actually our answer. Our answer is that you ask anybody, the most dyed-in-the-wool, ardent, anti-government conservative, look out your window. Is it flooding more than it used to? And they'll tell you it is. And we say, that's all we're trying to deal with here. We're not trying to deal with global issues. We know the water's higher than it used to be. And that's where we're going from. And then with both, particularly with our Vision 2100 project, but also with our zoning ordinance, we really focused on being positive and forward-looking. With our Vision 2100 public meetings, we essentially said, there is no negativity coming in here. You're coming in here and you're going to tell us only about the positive. And it worked. We started off with asset mapping meetings and said only the positive. And after a series of meetings, you would have residents turn around and shut down a naysayer. Not the staff, the residents would do it and say, we're only supposed to be positive here, and talking about the assets of our city and what we want to protect going forward. So it really, we were fortunate that we didn't have those types of elements. But I think even if we did have those types of elements, I think we handled it in a way that others could use that might help short circuit that.
Hello, can you rent out some of your citizens to just sort of plop in other public meetings? That's great. Another question for you. Is there somewhere online where folks can find the full point chart and options for development? So more information.
Absolutely. The entire thing is in our zoning ordinance, which is on our website. I believe zonenorfolk.com still works. But if not, just the Norfolk zoning ordinance, and it's entirely in there now. It's Article 5.12.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy, I'm going to give you a break for a minute and switch back to Clement again. This question for you, Clement. Can you explain more about the formation, membership, and role of the Healthy Design Work Group? Is it an ongoing group, or was it for the park planning process only?
Sure. So the Healthy Design Work Group is ongoing. It was created just before we started on the community parks and recreation plans. And it meets quarterly right now. So with representatives from all the departments I had mentioned, and we touch on a variety of issues. So it could be pedestrian planning, it could be a sustainability plan. Right now, I think one of the items is a climate action plan. So it's really touching on issues that cover all the various county departments.
Okay, good. Thank you. And could you, Clement, again, this one's for you. Could you or did you face any oppositional concerns regarding health and safety when proposing to develop a park and utility corridor? So how did you gain support for this project from particularly the utility companies and then the surrounding larger community?
That's a really good question. We actually had significant opposition for a project we proposed in the utility corridor. So it's not the one that I showed. It's one that's actually not in the plan because of the opposition we faced. And it was an opportunity that we identified, and as a good lesson actually, something that looks good on a map for parks and open space and for connectivity may not work out due to community opposition, and we have to listen to the community and understand the history of a place. So in this particular example, it was a utility corridor that was used for a lot of illegal dumping, just activities that the surrounding residents were not pleased with, and they worked really hard to clean it up. So what they told us was they really didn't want to create a new park there where outsiders could come, and we just had to respect that. And there were other opportunities in the community where we could create parks.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy, we're going to flip back to you for a moment. The ordinance addresses development, but what about the infrastructure connecting the development? Could you speak to that?
A little bit. So again, our focus in planning is really on that element, the zoning element. But so taking a step back to our Vision 2100 program, it was all about trying to figure out where to put that investment. If you had $1 to spend, where would you put it? And so it ultimately ended up, the document really directs our investment to the high risk, high asset areas more than anything. So the areas that have our downtown, our medical facilities, our universities, those areas that are also at risk are the areas where we're going to be investing the most of our money, the most of our resources. And we are actually currently working through several infrastructure projects, including one that was a NDRC National Disaster Resilience Competition grant. We won $120 million from HUD that's doing about a mile of shoreline, doing floodgates and walls and infrastructure. It's that slow process that we have to work through to really to get there. So our goal with zoning was to see how we could get the private sector and every person in the city to do just their share, just a little bit more, and really take that shared burden, because $120 million for a mile of shoreline protection when we have 144 miles of shoreline is a long way to go.
Thank you. Jeremy, how much pushback did you get with waterfront property owners when unveiling the new ordinance?
Really, we really didn't get too much, to be honest. Most of the existing property owners, and the reason why is because most of the existing property owners, it doesn't affect directly because they're not developing. We didn't change our flood zones or our flood regulations. Those were already in place, so they already knew if you owned a home on the waterfront, which the vast majority of Norfolk's waterfront is single-family homes. If you owned a home on the waterfront, you already knew that you were getting flood insurance, and you already knew that all the elements. It really didn't affect the current owner. It affected the future owner, the developer, and that's really where we got most of the pushback, was from the building community.
Okay, that makes sense. One more question for you for right now. Regarding the higher first floor requirement, talk about accessibility requirements and how that relates to it.
It's a good question. So it primarily addresses single-family homes. And so for single-family homes, you don't have to, you're not required to meet those accessibility, at least not here in Virginia. But we have had those conversations with the builders, and that is definitely something that has been brought up to us. But for us, as much as anything else, it's a context thing. The traditional Norfolk house is elevated three feet plus off the ground, so it fits in well, and it's going to be protected from the flooding. We thought that was as significant a challenge as anything else. In non-residential and multifamily, the elevations aren't as high because we know we do have to meet ADA requirements, and so they're a lot more permissive in that respect.
Okay, thank you. Joel, didn't forget about you. You're up to bat. How does the SDAT initiation process work? So in other words, how does the pre-planning work? Who from the community usually invites the SDAT team in? Who does the pre-planning work?
Sure. So it varies by community. One of the application requirements from any community is to form a local steering committee. And we like that to be broad-based. So have representation from every sector of the community and form a leadership group that's going to do a lot of the pre-planning work. That starts with the application, of course, but then in the lead up to the process, we collect every existing plan and background, bit of information we can get, and put it on an FTP site for our team to become fluent in. And then on the community engagement side, we encourage the local steering committees to engage in as varied, as creative, and as repetitive, outreach as possible, right? So we get all kinds of responses to that. Communities that, the Hillsburg community, they, did all the sort of canvassing and organizational meeting kind of things that are, pretty conventional, but they also had painted rocks in their parks that were promoting the event. They had all kinds of little, food and other related events that, got them the big turnout in that process. And so with every community, it's kind of a conversation about thinking creatively about what works to engage people in that community, and then, really mobilizing groups of people that can participate in that. So every community is a little different. Sometimes, the initiation comes from the public sector. Sometimes it comes from a local AIA chapter or some other entity in the community, community development corporation, a nonprofit, or others. So it looks different in every community, but the goal is to build enough capacity through that steering committee that you can host a process and engage the community successfully, so you get huge participation and momentum.
Thank you. Clement, back to you. This is a good question. Was there a process to select which use for the parks take priority? Playground versus a quiet space versus conservation. Could you talk to that?
Sure. So we, as part of the community engagement and outreach process, we had these design workshops. So folks could vote for the amenities they wanted to see, first of all. So that's kind of stick a dot exercise. And then moving on from that, we actually had a set of meetings or sessions where community members could tell us where to put those amenities, and we engage in a dialogue on really figuring out what is appropriate and what could fit. And so the residents also, when they're in these small groups, they engage each other and they kind of compromise on whether they need a playground more than, say, a passive area. But most of the spaces that we were looking at were fairly small, and these are pretty built up urban communities. So it's a bit challenging. I think the spaces that we have proposed is a combination of spaces for active recreational sports, as well as the need for kind of passive recreation. And maybe touching on the earlier question about utility corridors, there's so much regulation from utility on what we could do in those corridors. Those are primarily passive recreation or green space for informal play or exercise and just walking.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy, back to you. Was the ordinance produced in-house, or did you work with a consulting firm?
Yeah, I neglected to mention, I had a note on my notes. Clarion Associates, a team from Clarion Associates had a contract with us to do the bulk of the work, and they did a great job getting the bulk of the ordinance to us.
Okay, thank you. I have some more, a few specific questions regarding the ordinance. The first one is, how did you arrive at the 16-inch elevation requirement, and why is it required outside of the flood hazard areas?
Sure. So I'll answer the second part first. We had, in 2015, we had a significant local impact from Hurricane Matthew, and that really put a charge into us to look at what we could do outside the flood zone, because a large number of neighborhoods, mostly in neighboring cities in Virginia Beach and Chesapeake, ended up having substantial flooding in newer neighborhoods that were not in the flood zone, that were all built on slab-on-grade homes, elevated right at the ground level, and they had water in the houses because the stormwater systems failed. So we said, what can we do to prevent that in the future? And we said, well, let's just put a requirement to build above elevation anywhere in the city. So we looked at different options. We had the 3-foot freeboard in flood zones, and then in the X-shaded flood zone, we have an 18 inches. So we actually initially put the 18 inches just to match that area, thinking that that would work. Actually, through consultation with our builders, the reason we ended up with 16 inches is because that's the amount of 2 courses of block. And so that made more sense to them. It was easier for them to work with just 2 courses of block, because if you do anything other than that, you end up with a partial or something like that. So that's why we have 16 inches.
Okay, thank you. And then regarding the points breakdown for the resilience quotients, is there a minimum number of points a development must meet before being approved?
There is. In fact, it depends on, there's an associated table with the points table that tells you, depending on if you're doing residential, how many units, if you're doing non-residential, it's how much square footage, will tell you how many points you're required to get, and it will tell you how many points you're required to get from each category. So there's 3 categories, so your minimum might be 4 points, and it might say 4 points and 1 from each of the 3 categories. So yeah, that's, it varies depending on the size of your development.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for one more question, and this one's going to go to Joel. Can you describe how the SDAT process differs from something like a charrette?
It's very charrette-like. It was it started in the 60s, and, a lot of the early RUDATs, which are 4-day processes, are very charrette-like. The key difference with an SDAT and some kind of design charrette is that, you've got an interdisciplinary team that does not have a client, and is responding to key issues across the spectrum and looking holistically at whatever piece of the city that is, or small town, and responding to it and citizen input. But it's a version of a charrette style process for sure. I mean, it's a community process that's several days and is a moment in that community. It's not a 6-month planning process. So it has the advantages and disadvantages of charrette in that you can very quickly build momentum from all that public participation and get moving on implementation, but it's not going to build capacity over time the way you can with a multi-month or year-long planning process.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. So thanks to Jenny and the Sustainable Communities Division for hosting today's webcast, and for Clement and Joel and Jeremy. Your projects are great, and congratulations for winning. And thank you for talking to us about these great projects. Everyone, thanks for joining us. We will talk next time. Don't forget to like us on Facebook. Check out our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org, for up-to-date info on our sessions. And everybody, have a great weekend.